My name is Marcus Chin. I'm 38 years old, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I was a senior forensic accountant at Richardson and Associates in Seattle, Washington, with a beautiful house in Bellevue, a wife I'd been married to for 12 years, and 2 kids who were my entire world. Or at least, I thought they were. I met Rebecca when we were both 24, at a mutual friend's wedding in Portland. She was a pediatric nurse with this infectious laugh and warm brown eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. Our daughter Lily came along when I was 28, and our son Ethan followed 3 years after that. By all accounts, we were the picture-perfect family. Weekend barbecues, annual trips to Cannon Beach, soccer practice, dance recitals, the whole suburban dream. My job as a forensic accountant meant I spent my days following paper trails, uncovering fraud, and piecing together financial puzzles that others couldn't solve. I was good at it too, really good. I'd helped prosecute 3 major embezzlement cases in the past 5 years alone. My specialty was finding what people thought they'd hidden forever. The irony of what was about to happen wasn't lost on me later. Rebecca and I had our routines. She worked 3 12-hour shifts a week at Seattle Children's Hospital, and I typically did a standard 9 to 5, though cases sometimes kept me late. We built a comfortable life. Our mortgage was manageable. We had college funds started for both kids, and we even had date nights twice a month, something we'd insisted on maintaining despite the chaos of raising 2 children. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that I was too blind to notice. Or maybe too trusting, too comfortable. It started with small things. Rebecca's phone face down on the counter, always. Her sudden interest in going to the gym 4 times a week instead of 2. New lingerie I never saw her wear. Late night shift extensions that seemed to happen more frequently. The way she'd angle her body away from me when texting. But I told myself I was being paranoid. We'd been together for 14 years. We had kids, a life. She loved me, right. The catalyst for everything that followed happened on a random Tuesday in March. Lily, who was 10 at the time, came home from school excited about a science project. Her 5th grade class was doing a unit on genetics, and one of the optional extra credit projects involved DNA testing. Those ancestry kits had become popular, and several kids in her class were bringing in their results to map out their heritage. "Dad, can we do it, please? Maya's family found out they're part Irish and part Nigerian. I want to know where our family comes from." I saw no harm in it. In fact, I thought it would be a fun family activity. I was Chinese American. My grandparents had immigrated from Guangzhou, and Rebecca was a mix of German and English descent. I figured the kids would show an interesting blend. I ordered 4 kits that evening from Ancestry DNA. They arrived within a week, and we made it into a family event. Saturday morning, March 14th, 2024. I remember the date exactly because it was the last day my life made sense. We all spit into our little tubes, laughing because 7-year-old Ethan kept giggling about having to make so much spit. Rebecca seemed normal, happy even. She helped seal the tubes and even offered to drop them at the post office on her way to the gym the next morning. The results took about 6 weeks to process. In that time, life continued as normal. I closed the case involving a contractor who'd been inflating invoices for years. Rebecca threw Lily a birthday party at a trampoline park. Ethan lost his first tooth. We were living our lives, completely unaware that everything was about to detonate. The email came on a Thursday evening, April 25th, at 6:47 p.m. I was in my home office finishing up some paperwork when the notification popped up. "Your Ancestry DNA results are ready." I felt a little flutter of excitement. I called for the family to come upstairs. The results took about 6 weeks to process. In that time, life continued as normal. I closed the case involving a contractor who'd been inflating invoices for years. Rebecca threw Lily a birthday party at a trampoline park. Ethan lost his first tooth. We were living our lives, completely unaware that everything was about to detonate. The email came on a Thursday evening, April 25th, at 6:47 p.m. I was in my home office finishing up some paperwork when the notification popped up. "Your Ancestry DNA results are ready." I felt a little flutter of excitement. I called for the family to come upstairs. "Results are in. Let's see what we've got." Rebecca appeared in the doorway with Lily and Ethan. "Oh, that's today? I completely forgot about those," she said. Something in her voice sounded off, but I dismissed it. I pulled up my results first. Exactly as expected. 94% Chinese, 4% broadly East Asian, 2% unassigned. Nothing surprising. Lily crowded in next to me. "Do mine!" I clicked over to her results, expecting to see a mix of my Chinese heritage and Rebecca's European background. What appeared on the screen made my stomach drop. 72% European, primarily German and British, 15% Scandinavian, 8% French, 5% other European categories, 0% Asian, not a trace. I stared at the screen, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. There had to be a mistake, a mix-up at the lab. But even as I thought it, my forensic training was kicking in. That part of my brain that solved puzzles screaming that something was very, very wrong. "That's weird," I said slowly. trying to keep my voice neutral with the kids there. Lily, honey, you should have some of Daddy's Chinese heritage. Let me check Ethan's. I clicked to Ethan's results with hands that had started to shake. My son. My 7-year-old boy who had my smile, or so I'd always thought. 68% European. 18% Scandinavian. 9% German and British. 5% French and other. 0% Asian. The room started to spin. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. 14 years. 2 children. And sitting there in cold, scientific data was proof that neither of them carried a single marker of my DNA. Marcus? You okay? You look pale. Rebecca's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I turned to look at her, and I saw it. For just a fraction of a second, her face revealed everything, guilt, fear, panic, before she composed herself. But I'd seen it. That flash of recognition that I'd discovered something. Kids, go downstairs for a bit. Daddy needs to talk to Mommy about something. But Dad, what about our results? Are we Irish? Lily's voice was so innocent, so unaware of the bomb that had just gone off. We'll look at them later, sweetheart. Go on. My voice sounded remarkably steady considering my entire world was collapsing. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day. Each one more intense than the last. Once I heard them reach the bottom of the stairs, I turned to Rebecca. She was standing frozen in place, her face white as paper. Tell me there's a mistake, I said quietly. Tell me the lab mixed up the samples. Tell me something that makes sense. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Tears started streaming down her face. Marcus. How long? My voice was ice. How long have you been lying to me? She collapsed into the chair, sobbing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. How long? I repeated through gritted teeth. 13 years. Since before Lily. The words hit me like a physical blow. Before Lily. Before we even had kids. Who? I demanded. Dr. Reeves. Blake Reeves. From the hospital. Blake Reeves. I knew exactly who he was. The cardiac surgeon. 6'3", athletic, with that perfect jawline and designer stubble. He'd been to our house. To our barbecues. I'd shaken his hand. Made small talk about the Seahawks. And the entire time, he'd been sleeping with my wife. Fathering my children. Both of them? I could barely form the words. She nodded, still sobbing. I wanted to tell you so many times. But then we had Lily, and she was so perfect, and you loved her so much. And then Ethan came, and I thought maybe I could just never tell you. That you'd never find out. That it didn't matter because you were their father in every way that counted. Didn't matter? I stood up, my chair scraping violently against the floor. You let me believe for 10 years that Lily was mine. 7 years for Ethan. I've raised them. Loved them. Changed their diapers, stayed up all night when they were sick, taught them to ride bikes, helped with homework, and you're telling me it doesn't matter? You are their father! She cried. You're the one they call Dad. You're the one who's been there for everything. Blake doesn't even know. That stopped me cold. He doesn't know? He thinks I got pregnant by you. We were careful, but birth control failed with Lily, and I broke things off with him immediately. Then a few years later, we had a weak moment, and I got pregnant with Ethan. But I ended it for good after that. He has no idea they're his biological children. I stared at this woman I thought I'd known. This person I'd built a life with, shared a bed with, trusted completely. She was a stranger. Get out, I said quietly. Marcus, please. Get out of my office. She left, and I sat there in the darkness as night fell outside my window. My mind was racing, but my training was taking over. Evidence. I needed evidence. Because while I had DNA proof that the kids weren't biologically mine, I needed more if I was going to do what I was already planning. Rebecca had betrayed me in the worst possible way. She'd let me raise another man's children without my knowledge, stolen 13 years of my life, and built our entire marriage on a foundation of lies. And now, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she was. But I wasn't going to be reckless. No, I was going to be methodical, careful, and absolutely devastating. That night, I slept in the guest room. I told the kids that Mommy and I had a disagreement and needed some space, but that everything would be okay. Lily looked worried, but Ethan just shrugged and went back to his video game. They had no idea their whole world was about to change. Over the next 3 days, I barely spoke to Rebecca. I went to work, came home, helped with homework, read bedtime stories. I acted as normal as possible. But every spare moment, I was planning. First, I needed to secure my finances. On Friday, I opened a new bank account at a different bank and began gradually transferring money into it, amounts small enough not to trigger alerts but substantial enough to build a safety net. I documented every penny with receipts and notes, ensuring everything would be above board in divorce proceedings. Second, I needed more evidence of the affair. While I had the DNA proof, I wanted to know the full scope of the betrayal. Was it still ongoing? For 13 years, or had there been breaks? I needed to know everything. I installed recovery software on our home computer that night, while Rebecca was at work. It took me 20 minutes to dig through the deleted files and browser history she thought she'd erased. My forensic accounting skills translated perfectly to digital forensics. People always think delete means gone forever. It doesn't. What I found made me physically ill. Emails. Hundreds of them. Going back years. Some were mundane. Coffee tomorrow? But others were explicit. Detailed descriptions of their encounters. Hotels I recognized. Dates I could pinpoint on our family calendar when she'd said she was at work late or at a friend's house. But the worst part? The absolute knife in my heart? An email from 6 years ago, right after Ethan was born. Blake asking if the baby looked like him. Rebecca responding with a photo of Ethan in the hospital, saying, "He has your nose, I think. But Marcus doesn't suspect anything. He's so happy." They joked about it. About deceiving me. About me raising Blake's son while completely oblivious. I saved everything. Every email, every photo, every message. I created encrypted backups and stored them in 3 separate locations. Cloud storage, a flash drive in my office, and another flash drive in my safe deposit box at the bank. Then I checked her phone records. I could access them through our shared account. The pattern was clear. Calls to Blake's number. I'd cross-referenced it with the hospital directory, spiked during certain months, and then went quiet for periods. It matched what she told me about breaking things off, and then restarting. But here's what she'd lied about. It hadn't ended, for good, after Ethan. The calls continued. The last one had been 3 weeks ago. They were still in contact. Maybe not sleeping together anymore, but she was still lying to me about the extent of their relationship. By Monday morning, 1 week after the DNA results, I had a complete picture. I'd also consulted with 2 different divorce attorneys, confidentially, and learned exactly what I needed to do to protect myself and ensure the best possible outcome. Washington is a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity can still impact decisions about asset division and custody. More importantly, I learned about disestablishment of paternity. In Washington, I could potentially be released from child support obligations since the children weren't biologically mine, especially since I had discovered it relatively soon after finding out, and Rebecca had engaged in fraud by misrepresenting paternity. But here's the thing, I didn't want to abandon Lily and Ethan. Despite everything, they were innocent. They called me Dad. They'd known me their whole lives. But I did want Blake to face the consequences of what he'd done. And I wanted Rebecca to lose everything, so I crafted my revenge carefully. Phase 1 began on Tuesday, May 7th. I scheduled a meeting with Blake Reeves. I called his office directly, told his assistant I needed to speak with him about a confidential family matter involving one of his colleagues, Rebecca Chin. The assistant, probably assuming it was some sort of HR issue or hospital business, scheduled me for 2 p.m. that Thursday. Phase 2 was legal preparation. I filed for divorce on Wednesday, May 8th, citing irreconcilable differences and attaching a sealed document that outlined the paternity fraud for the judge's eyes only. My attorney assured me it would give us leverage. I requested full custody temporarily, a division of assets, and, here's where it got interesting, I demanded Blake Reeves be added to the case as a third party for the purposes of establishing child support obligations. Phase 3 was where things got nuclear. Thursday arrived. I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one I wore for major court testimonies. I gathered every piece of evidence I'd compiled, the DNA results, the emails, the phone records, timeline documentation, and put it all in a professional binder. Then I drove to Seattle Presbyterian Hospital. Blake's office was on the 4th floor of the medical building. Sleek, modern, with diplomas from Johns Hopkins covering one wall. He stood up when I entered, hand extended, that practiced doctor smile on his face. "Mr. Chen, is it? My assistant said this was about Rebecca. Is everything all right? She's not ill, I hope." I didn't shake his hand. I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk and placed the binder between us. "Dr. Reeves, I'm going to make this very simple. 10 days ago, my family did ancestry DNA testing. The results showed that neither of my children, Lily, age 10, and Ethan, age 7, share any of my genetic markers. However, they do share significant genetic markers with each other, indicating they have the same biological father." The color drained from his face. I don't understand what this has to do with me. My wife confessed to a 13-year affair with you. An affair that resulted in the birth of both of my children. Your children, Dr. Reeves." He sat down heavily. No, that's not possible. Rebecca and we ended things years ago. Before she even had kids." I opened the binder and slid the DNA results across the desk. "The science doesn't lie. I'm a forensic accountant, doctor. I deal in evidence. And the evidence is irrefutable." He stared at the papers, his hands shaking. "I didn't know. You have to believe me, I had no idea. I've compiled additional evidence here." I pushed forward printouts of the emails, the phone records. "This shows the duration and frequency of your affair with my wife. It also shows that you remained in contact even after Ethan's birth, contrary to what Rebecca told me." Jesus Christ. He was actually crying now, this big-shot surgeon falling apart in his fancy office. "I have a wife. 2 kids of my own. This will destroy my family. Now you understand how I feel," I said coldly. "Here's what's going to happen. I've filed for divorce from Rebecca. I'm also petitioning the court to establish you as the biological father of Lily and Ethan Chen, with appropriate child support obligations. You'll be receiving a subpoena for a court-ordered paternity test within the week. You can't do this. The scandal, the hospital board, my career. Should have thought about that before you spent 13 years sleeping with a married woman and fathering children with her." I stood up. "Oh, and one more thing. I've scheduled a meeting with the hospital's chief of staff for tomorrow morning. I believe Dr. Morrison should know about the extramarital affair between 2 of his staff members that resulted in children. There are ethics clauses in your employment contracts, aren't there?" His face went from white to green. Please don't do this. We can work something out. I'll pay you. Whatever you want. I don't want your money, doctor. I want justice. I want you to feel a fraction of what I've felt this past week. And I want everyone to know what kind of people you and Rebecca really are." I left his office and walked straight to the hospital administration wing. Dr. Morrison was a man I'd met twice at hospital fundraisers, a stern, by-the-book administrator who took the institution's reputation seriously. His assistant tried to tell me he was busy, but I told her it was regarding a serious ethical breach involving 2 staff members and potential legal liability for the hospital. That got me in the door. I spent 45 minutes with Dr. Morrison, laying out everything. The affair. The children. The DNA evidence. The emails between Rebecca and Blake discussing their encounters, some of which referenced meeting during hospital shifts. I made it clear I wasn't planning to sue the hospital, but I wanted them to be aware that 2 of their employees had engaged in a lengthy affair that had resulted in paternity fraud, and that legal proceedings were now underway. Dr. Morrison's face grew darker with each revelation. "We will be launching an internal investigation immediately," he said. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mr. Chen. And I'm very sorry for what you're going through." I got the sense he was less sorry for me and more worried about the PR nightmare headed his way, but I didn't care. The wheels were now in motion. I drove home that evening knowing that by tomorrow, the entire hospital would be buzzing with the scandal. These things had a way of spreading fast in professional environments, especially when they involved prominent doctors. Rebecca was in the kitchen when I arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, which gave me a grim satisfaction. "Marcus, please, can we talk? Really talk? You were served today, weren't you?" I'd had the divorce papers delivered to her at work. Another calculated move. I wanted her colleagues to see it, to start asking questions. "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus, you can't do this. Think about the kids. They need stability. They need both of us. You should have thought about that before you fucked Blake Reeves for 13 years. She flinched. I'd never spoken to her like that before. Please. I know I messed up. I know I can never make this right. But we can go to counseling. We can work through this. For Lily and Ethan. Tell me something, I said. Did you ever love me? Or was I just a safe choice? The good provider who'd raise another man's kids while you had your exciting affair? Of course I loved you. I still love you. You have a funny way of showing it. I headed toward the stairs. I'm sleeping in the guest room indefinitely. Don't talk to me unless it's about the kids' immediate needs. My lawyer will be in contact about the custody schedule. You're really going through with this? The divorce? I turned back to her. Rebecca, you stole 13 years of my life. You let me bond with children who aren't mine, knowing that discovering the truth would devastate me. You made me into a joke, Marcus Chen, the fool who didn't know his wife was pregnant with another man's babies. Twice. So yes, I'm going through with this. And I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what you did. Over the next 2 weeks, everything unraveled exactly as I'd planned. Blake was placed on administrative leave pending the hospital's investigation. The local news picked up the story, not with names, but enough details that anyone who knew us could figure it out. Seattle Hospital investigates affair between surgeon and nurse that resulted in paternity fraud. Rebecca's friends started distancing themselves. I know because several of them reached out to me privately, expressing their shock and support. Turns out Rebecca had told people we were having some problems, but she painted me as the difficult one, the workaholic husband who didn't appreciate her. Now the truth was out, and her support network evaporated. The court-ordered paternity test confirmed what we all knew. Blake Reeves was the biological father of both children. His wife filed for divorce within 48 hours of receiving that news. I actually felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was as much a victim in this as I was. Rebecca was moved to a different department at the hospital, away from Blake, but the damage was done. Her co-workers knew. Everyone knew. She went from being Rebecca Chin, respected pediatric nurse, to Rebecca Chin, the woman who had an affair and lied about her kid's paternity for over a decade. But the most devastating part of my revenge was still to come. I'd spent those 2 weeks having careful, age-appropriate conversations with Lily and Ethan. I didn't tell them about the paternity situation. They were too young for that. But I did explain that Mommy and Daddy were getting divorced because Mommy had broken our marriage promises. I emphasized over and over that they were not at fault, that I loved them no matter what, and that we'd figure out a new normal together. Lily cried a lot. Ethan seemed confused but adaptable. It broke my heart, but I knew that the truth would eventually come out as they got older, and I wanted them to hear my version first, to understand that I was the wrong party, not their mother. Then came the court hearing for temporary custody on May 29th. I walked into that courtroom with my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Vaughn who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Rebecca was there with her attorney, a nervous-looking man who clearly knew he was fighting an uphill battle. Rebecca had tried to argue that I was abandoning the children emotionally, that I'd become cold and distant. But I documented everything, every bedtime story I'd read since the discovery, every meal I'd cooked, every homework assignment I'd helped with. I'd been nothing but a devoted father, even in the midst of my personal crisis. When it came time to present our case, Patricia was ruthless. She laid out the timeline of the affair, the DNA evidence, the emails discussing the deception. She showed how Rebecca had committed paternity fraud, a serious breach of trust that called her judgment and character into question. Your Honor, my client has been the primary emotional support for these children throughout their entire lives. He has been present, engaged, and loving. Meanwhile, Ms. Chin conducted a decade-plus affair, bore 2 children under false pretenses, and has shown a pattern of deception and poor decision-making. We believe the children's best interests are served by remaining primarily with Mr. Chin during this difficult transition. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and no-nonsense demeanor, looked at Rebecca with barely concealed disgust. Ms. Chen, I've seen a lot in my years on the bench, but the scope of deception in this case is extraordinary. You allowed your husband to believe for years that these children were his biological offspring. You've denied Dr. Reeves the opportunity to know his children and denied these children the right to know their true biological father. This is not a case of a one-time mistake. This is a pattern of calculated dishonesty. Rebecca's attorney tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. I'm granting Mr. Chin primary physical custody, with Ms. Chin receiving supervised visitation until we can assess the long-term custody arrangement. I'm also ordering Ms. Chen to begin individual therapy to address the issues that led to this situation before we consider expanded custody. Supervised visitation. Rebecca's face crumpled. She'd gone from living with her children to seeing them only under supervision. It was brutal, but it was what she deserved. As we left the courthouse, Patricia put a hand on my shoulder. That was one of the most decisive temporary custody rulings I've seen. You documented everything perfectly. You're going to come out of this in a strong position. I nodded, but I felt hollow. Yes, I'd won. But at what cost? My marriage was over. The children I'd loved as my own weren't biologically mine. My entire life had been upended. Still, I wasn't done yet. The financial settlement was the final piece. Washington is a community property state, which means marital assets are typically split 50-50ths. But I had leverage. My attorney argued that Rebecca's affair and fraud constituted financial harm to me. I'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years raising children I believed were mine under false pretenses. Medical bills, childcare, education, food, clothing, all of it based on a lie. We pushed for a 70-30th split in my favor, and after tense negotiations, Rebecca's attorney advised her to accept 65-35ths. She didn't have much choice. If we went to trial, the publicity would be even worse, and a judge might give her even less. I also made sure that Blake Reeves was on the hook for child support. Substantial child support. He was a cardiac surgeon making over $800,000 a year. The state guidelines meant he'd be paying approximately $4,000 per month per child, $8,000 total. That money would go into trust funds for Lily and Ethan's futures. Rebecca's income as a nurse was roughly $85,000 annually. She was ordered to pay me $900 per month in child support as well, since I had primary custody. Between what I was paying for the kids' expenses and what I was receiving, it actually worked out fairly well financially. But more than the money, it was about accountability. Both Rebecca and Blake were paying for what they'd done, literally and figuratively. By the end of June, just 3 months after that fateful DNA test, my life had completely transformed. I'd moved forward with the divorce, which was finalized in record time given Rebecca's lack of desire to fight. She knew she had no leg to stand on. I got the house, the majority of our savings, primary custody, and the satisfaction of knowing that everyone knew the truth. Rebecca moved into a modest apartment in Seattle, closer to the hospital. Her relationship with Blake was effectively over. He wanted nothing to do with her after his own marriage imploded and his reputation took a massive hit. He was paying child support but had expressed no interest in actually forming a relationship with Lily and Ethan. Part of me understood. They were strangers to him, and his own family was in shambles. Part of me despised him for it. Blake's medical career survived barely. He wasn't fired, but he was removed from several prestigious committees, lost his position as head of cardiothoracic surgery, and became a pariah in the hospital's social scene. His ex-wife got custody of their 2 kids in a hefty divorce settlement. Last I heard, he'd taken a position at a smaller hospital in Tacoma, essentially a demotion, just to escape the gossip. Rebecca's nursing career was similarly damaged. She still worked at Seattle Children's, but she'd lost the respect of her colleagues. No more leadership roles on her unit. No more nominations for Nursing Excellence Awards. She was just another nurse, punching a clock, counting down to retirement. And me? I threw myself into being the best father I could be to Lily and Ethan. Yes, they weren't biologically mine. Yes, every time I looked at them, I was reminded of the betrayal. But they were also the same kids I'd loved for years. They hadn't changed. Only my knowledge had changed. I decided early on that I wouldn't let Rebecca's actions poison my relationship with them. I went to therapy, for myself, to work through the complex emotions. Anger at Rebecca, grief for the loss of my marriage, confusion about my role as a father to children who weren't genetically mine but who I'd raised and loved. My therapist, Dr. Chandra, helped me understand that fatherhood isn't just about DNA. It's about showing up. It's about being present. It's about love and sacrifice and commitment. And by those measures, I was absolutely Lily and Ethan's father, regardless of what any test said. I made a decision in therapy that I would tell them the truth when they were older, teenagers, probably, when they could understand the complexity of the situation. But for now, I was just dad. And that was enough. The revelation about the DNA tests did lead to some difficult conversations. Lily was old enough to wonder why the results showed 0 Asian heritage when her dad was Chinese. I told her a simplified version of the truth, sometimes families are made in different ways, and DNA doesn't always show the whole picture. She seemed satisfied with that for now. I also started dating again in September, almost 6 months after the discovery. It felt strange at first, awkward, like I was betraying something even though my marriage was legally over. But I met a woman named Jennifer at a work conference. She was a fraud investigator for an insurance company, someone who understood the kind of work I did. We took things slow, but it felt good to connect with someone new, someone who wasn't tied to all the pain of the past year. Jennifer knew my story. I was upfront about it from the start, and she admired how I'd handled everything. "You could have walked away from those kids," she said over dinner one night. "A lot of men would have. But you stayed. You fought for them. That says everything about who you are." If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Now, in October, as I sit here reflecting on the past 6 months, I can honestly say I don't regret how I handled things. Could I have been less vindictive? Maybe. But Rebecca and Blake didn't just make a mistake. They engaged in systematic deception for over a decade. They deserve to face consequences. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about how thoroughly I dismantled both of their lives. The answer is no. They made their choices. I simply made sure those choices had appropriate repercussions. Do I still love Lily and Ethan? Absolutely. Do I wish they were biologically mine? Sometimes, yes. But mostly, I've come to terms with it. They're mine in every way that matters. Do I miss the life I thought I had? Of course. But I've also learned something valuable. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living a lie. I spent 13 years living in a fantasy, believing in a marriage that was built on deception. Now I'm building a real life, one based on honesty and authenticity. Rebecca has limited visitation, every other weekend and one evening per week, no longer supervised after she completed her court-ordered therapy. She tries to have conversations with me about co-parenting and healing, but I keep things strictly business. Pickup times, school events, medical appointments. That's the extent of our communication. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she deeply regrets what happened, that she wishes she could turn back time and make different choices. But regret doesn't undo damage. It doesn't give me back the 13 years I lost. It doesn't erase the nights I lie awake wondering what else in my life was a lie. Blake sends his child support payments on time. I'll give him that. But he's never asked to meet Lily and Ethan. Never requested visitation. He's content to be a name on a check, a biological contributor but not a father. Part of me is relieved. Part of me thinks he's a coward. The kids ask about him sometimes. "Who is Dr. Reeves?" Lily asked once after overhearing part of a conversation between me and my attorney. I told her he was someone who helped bring her into the world, but that I'm her dad in all the ways that count. She seemed to accept that. I know harder conversations are coming. Eventually, they'll want the full story. They'll want to understand why their parents divorced, why their last name doesn't match their biological father's, why everything is so complicated. When that time comes, I'll tell them the truth, age appropriately, and with compassion. But I'll also make sure they know that none of it was their fault, and that my love for them has never wavered. Looking back at that Tuesday in March when Lily came home excited about a genetics project, I sometimes wish I'd said no. That I'd never ordered those DNA kits. That I'd continued living in blissful ignorance. But most of the time, I'm glad I know. Because now I'm living an authentic life, painful as it is. I'm not lying to myself. I'm not being lied to. And I've shown my children, and myself, that even when life falls apart, you can rebuild with integrity and strength. The DNA test unraveled my perfect family, but it also revealed that perfection was an illusion. What I have now is messy and complicated, but it's real. And real, I've learned, is worth fighting for. My revenge wasn't just about punishing Rebecca and Blake, though they certainly deserved it. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my truth. It was about refusing to be a victim, and instead being a survivor who fought back. Some people might say I went too far, that I was too harsh, too vengeful. But those people didn't spend 13 years raising children under false pretenses. They didn't have their entire reality shattered by a simple ancestry test. They don't know what it's like to realize that the person you trusted most in the world had been deceiving you for more than a decade. I did what I had to do. I protected myself.